everyone. I'm going to run a session on enhancing language understanding using generative AI. Before that, I would like to quickly give a brief introduction about myself. I work in data analytics at ICS AI. They are Microsoft's inner circle partner in the UK, and we're primarily focused on the UK public sector. Previously, I worked with Tata Group as well in TCS Microsoft relationship, primarily or like analytics project. I've been a speaker at multiple and various events, as you can see on the screen, and I'm also a mentor at Femme Palette, which is a Prague-based organization, and Unstop India. And apart from that, I just like to travel, read, and hike in my free time. So that's me in summary. So before I go into the depth of all the topic, I would like to touch base upon firstly the hype around the tech world, which has been caused by the advent of generative AI, and essentially what it is and how it essentially is, what is essentially that makes it so powerful. So Gen AI, obviously, it's a set of algorithms that I used and created based on a lot of new content like audio, video, and text images. And our very first chat gpt that came into picture, it had 175 billion parameters, and it was created on a lot of data set. Like, it had many records. It is built on corpora, which is like, in layman language, it's a collection of data from various sources. It could be Wikipedia, it could be like online books, audio, anything. So it has been like a combination of so many things that makes the LLMs, which actually what we call them, large language models, so powerful. And because it was trained on so many different like data sets, it is able to understand things better. And that's how it comes into picture of language understanding. Now, to access this, obviously, one needs to know what a prompt is. A prompt is something which is just an initial input. Just imagine two people talking to each other, and a language that is used to, communicate between two people. Prompt is similar to that. It serves the starting point of communication, and structuring your prompt is extremely important to ensure that, like, you are actually accessing the value that generative AI provides. The quality and the specificity of your prompt is really significant to influence the output that you get. So at the end of the day, how you structure the prompt, what you ask, you have to be very, very specific about it, and try to be as detailed as you can so that it is giving you the output that you desire. Now, how does the landscape changed over time for NLP? So back in 1960s, we had rule-based systems where we decided, oh, we'll use these rules and systems for certain languages. And then gradually, with the change in time, statistical NLP came into picture, where we had n-grams, bigrams, trigrams, and then we had these corpus-based approaches. And fast forward to 2000, we had machine learning and deep learning, where we had things like word embeddings, support vector machine, all these algorithms. And now we are in today's world where we have these transformer models and LLMs that have evolved over time. And this is where we currently are in terms of natural language processing. So with this changing landscape, the main thing is how that affects us. So firstly, we obviously get pre-trained models because it is trained on a massive amount of data. It's quite of similar to what human language is. Second, continuous learning, because it's self-trained themselves. They're extremely powerful, and they can work on its own, interpret what a human desires. And then thirdly, there is contextualization. So generally, when you talk about different topics, the previous chatbots, if you imagine, they didn't have any context into play. They don't know essentially what you're talking about. It's just word. But here, because context is something which LLMs can understand, they're able to relate one word to another, in which they understand essentially what is asked of them. How this thing have evolved further is evolution. It is able to interpret nuances. So it is able to recognize the idioms, slangs, anything which is culturally specific, varied widely with any particular region or sector. It has voice and speech recognition now. So anything, for example, which is speech to text can be transformed and converted. And it's able to accurately interpret many of those things, provided you provide right prompts to it. And then thirdly, there is query interpretation, which is like, okay, I'm pretty sure people would be thinking, why have I written query interpretation? So if you imagine previous generation of, let's say, any kind of technology, let's say chatbots, right? If you give a longer set of queries, it would be like, okay, you want to ask me about X, Y, and Z. Like, there are three different things involved. So they were not really handling complex queries very well. But because generative AI can chunk down and understand each and every intent, each and every query that user asked, it's important to understand how powerful they are in terms of interpreting complex queries where The sentences can be 20 words or more, or user may be asking two or three questions within the same statement. Now, one of the very important part of natural language processing is context, which is like the background of which you are asking the questions about. It could be medical, it could be healthcare, it could be legal, politics, anything. So first thing is understanding. So it is able to remember the previous exchange of messages, i.e., it has memory. So it understands what the previous question was about. So let's say if you have been talking or asking questions around a banking institution, and suddenly you switch the context, it will probably give you answer related to banking. But probably you're asking question on river bank. So it understands what a bank is or a river bank is. It doesn't confuse the two words which are very similar to each other. So it's able to understand things better. It clarifies ambiguity. It is able to recognize the right intent, adjust the responses accordingly. And then thirdly, it's very adaptable, which is like in dynamic environments where the responses obviously need to change. It's able to change the responses and it's quite flexible with that. And thus it is able to cater to users' need. Apart from this, I'm pretty sure if anyone work has ever worked on data science, they would know that people used to use a lot of different libraries like Spacey and all for doing sentiment analysis or any kind of NLP work. But now sentiment analysis has taken a new world altogether because it goes beyond basics. It basically takes you a step further by detecting nuanced emotions. It understands frustration better. It understands any kind of emotion that is tied to human nature based on the kind of sentence structure you provide. There is semantic search, which is like not like keyword searches. So previously we had similarity algorithms where like people will ask certain question and then like it will try to compare words and keywords from one to another. But semantic search is different. It recognizes the intent, it recognizes the synonyms and the concepts better. The third is summarization. So I'm fairly sure at least some of the people, or at least most of the people, would have tried summarization tools on like I don't know, ChatGPT or other AI platforms in market today, and they're like fairly good in summarizing any key information or document that you provide them. So they're able to provide concise summaries. There's actually a tool in market called Read.ai, which is used as a plugin in Teams meeting as well. Like I've seen multiple people using it, which provides you summarization of action items, what each person said, what are the tasks involved, and so on. And then finally there's text generation, and there are like companies around who are generating synthetic data using chat gpt so that they can train their models better or test out user use cases as well. So these are some of the enhanced capabilities that come into picture with the advent of generative AI. Now I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into how NLP is interpreted and understood. So first thing is like we have different kinds of input we provide. The first is normal input. So normal input is simple. It's a balanced level of detail, just providing enough context to understand what we want the AI to answer. So what is basically our intent. Generally, it produces accurate responses for that. For example, what are the benefits of automation in engineering or manufacturing? Very simple question. It's clear, concise, and to the point. That's the first type of input. Second we have is a terse input. So terse input is anything which is very brief. It often lacks detail. It could be as simple as one word, two word input. So we generally classify anything which is less than four words as a terse input. So like council tax, council, automation benefits, or automation. And then finally we have a verbose input, which I actually discussed in the start. It's more about complex queries. There, the user provides a lot of detail, a lot of background, additional data, which may or may not be relevant. It's not necessary that it's actually tied to the topic. It can be lengthy, it could be short. For example, you can see here there is an example of industrial processes where the user is asking about automation's impact efficiency, employee productivity, cost savings, error reduction over time. And then they're also asking about potential challenges. So it's like multiple intent involved. There is not just one intent. So old language processing used to work in a way that people used to create intent models using, I don't know, cognitive services, or they used to use methods to essentially train models like supervised approaches. But now, because LLMs combine data from a lot of different sources, they are able to understand and interpret context better and thus chunk out larger queries in a faster and efficient way. So this is one of the use case you can see on the screen. So first is obviously what is council tax? Simple optimal input. Clearly knows, like we clearly know what is the intent here. The second is just council tax. It's just a terse input. Now what would a like What would a, let's say, child would understand if you say council tax, right? You could want to pay council tax, you can want a receipt for council tax, you could also want a refund. Like there could be multiple things you wanted to do with it. And then lastly, there is verbose input in which somebody wants to know about it, pay it, and also want a receipt. So multiple intent involved. So these are the three main types of inputs you will find in terms of people asking queries or like inputs for natural language processing. So when you try all these things, there are a couple of questions which come to mind. How different are these three things? The answers that we're getting, are they relevant? Are the answers even right? So I think these are the three main questions that came into my mind. And obviously they are different. They're not similar type of statements. Now the next thing was, is the answer relevant? And that's where I actually went into the next step, and where I'm going to explain the methodology that I've used to evaluate that. So we're gonna do a little bit of response evaluation. Response evaluation is essentially essential because it helps in assessing how accurate the answers that we get are. Variations in responses can indicate model's flexibility, which is good, and adaptability. But we also want to ensure that for same kind of queries, we're actually getting similar responses and they're not too different or too like diverse in nature. With that, the responses generally provided by LLMs are good because they have language familiarity. They are able to craft responses which are coherent, grammatically correct, and relevant to the wide variety of input. They can be fine tuned as well. You can like fine tune those models into specific areas. For example, if you are in healthcare, you might need to tune your model to more healthcare associated data so that it is able to understand certain terms or logics better. There is conversational flow as well, in which like they remember the previous flow of the conversation, the question asked, and they can also switch between different conversation flows as long as you explain them what's the context is, or essentially if you explain them that you have changed your topic of discussion. And then because of all these things, they're able to generate still relevant responses, which was previously not very possible. Now, how do you evaluate that? So for that, I've used a tool called Prompt Flow. Prompt Flow, it's a part of Azure ML. And Prompt Flow is basically a sequence of nodes that processes the input and it generates an output. And there are a couple of evaluation flows available in Prompt Flow, actually quite a lot right now, which are able to consume that data and they produce corresponding result based on that. So if you see my screen, there are two white snippets available. If you see the one on the right here, it shows you an input. There's a relevant score, there's a concat score, and there is a final output. What it essentially does is it takes the inputs, and there are a couple of scripts I've written in Python, which essentially calculates the relevant score, and it produces an output. Now, how does it work? So on the left side of screen, if you see, there are inputs. So input, I've provided a question, a context, and an answer. So this is a dummy data I've given, in which I've just generally asked a question about low voltage, and I gave a context and I gave an answer. And this is how prompt flow is used. You have to provide these inputs to the prompt flow so that it can evaluate the answers that is generated by the LLM. This is a structure. On the top there is a prompt. You have to give the prompt that you want to use. So for example, if I'm calculating the relevance of any answer, I've given a prompt value where I am asking and saying that it's an AI assistant and it needs to perform an evaluation metric, and then I'm, as a user, giving them a, a set of values. For example, 1 to 5. You can obviously change your prompt if you want to take value from 1 to 10 and so on, and explain them how essentially you would like to classify that value. So if the value is 1, it's not relevant. The value is 5, it's good relevant, and so on for 2, 3, and 4. And on the bottom side of the screen, there's a Python script written which basically calculates a score based on different parts of that statement that has been created. What it does, it creates an output metric. So I love metrics because, like, numbers, they provide discipline and they're not anecdotal, so it helps to support the findings that you make. So the output of this basically process generates a relevance metric. It contains things which basically help you to understand the reasoning and suggestions. A relevance metric basically provides you a pertinent and indirectly related value, which indicates if your answer is close enough or valuable, and it's also tied to the question that has been asked. But this is a use case, and you should understand that when to use this use case. First is if you want to enhance the user experience, if you're using LLMs in your processes and utility of your generative AI system. How will you read this particular metric? It's like answers are scored based on their ability to capture the key point. So let's say if you're asking something which is very simple, if the answer is able to capture that essence of that question, that's how it basically is understood and read. It generates a main metric which is called relevance. If the model's answers are highly relevant, it indicates that AI system comprehends and understands it better. And it's rated on a scale. So I've given 1 to 5, but obviously you can change it and give it 1 to 10 or so on as per your convenience. One being obviously irrelevant, which means that the answer generated is off topic and it's not tied to the context. 5 means perfect relevance, the answer is appropriate and it gives the right sort of output. How do you measure performance? So now you got a metric, you found everything. How will you measure performance? So after conducting multiple tests around a batch of 1,000 pairs on a random set of data, I found that the relevance score was above 4, which is what most people would aim for, 4 to 5. um, but they're not perfect. This means that they're definitely good answers, but they could change if the context changes. So if you change the question, if you change the context, the answer will obviously change. And in that case, your outcome might not be the same. So you will have to ensure that you provide the right sort of input in terms of context and also in terms of question. So this is basically used when you have already a curated answer and you want to compare it with the LLM answer, and you want to ensure that how much your curated answer is actually good enough or it balances out both of them or not. Ultimately, small differences in your question phrasing will impact the outcome. If the prompt flow is not well structured or it lacks clarity, it may result in something which is not right. It may give you something very broad, too narrow, or not aligned. So essentially, you have to ensure that all your inputs are in the right place to get the right sort of outcome. But at the end of the day, with everything that you create, there are always limitations that you have to address. So one of the limitation is ambiguity. Interpretation of words or phrases can get impacted with this. There could be repetition. There could be lack of consistency with the same question, because obviously we're not putting any guardrails on those kind of outputs. Third is domain. Domain is extremely important because like answers have to be really much tied to what kind of domain you are dealing with. If you're in medical especially, you need to make sure that the LLM model is trained to that particular domain, and the responses can vary based on that context. Then finally, user experience. If the model knows a user purpose, essentially if you are using it for research purposes, for shopping, troubleshooting, or your application is basically designed for a particular purpose in mind, it can definitely adjust its answer. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is context greatly impacts the response generated by LLM. Context helps to determine that you get consistent answers for the same set of input, and it provides accurate, relevant, and tailored specific to a particular situation. But to resolve this, where we are going, so I'm currently working on a project. So we have used a couple of techniques which might be useful for you in the long run. Firstly is grounding, and grounding essentially is a way where you verify that the outcome that you are generating is retrievable and it's actually accurate. For that, we're using RAG. I think people might be aware of this term quite well. RAGs are used to essentially use with generative AI methods, and they produce more accurate and trustworthy outcomes. Second is topic islands. Topic islands essentially use if you have a domain specific data. For example, you are tied to a public sector or medical, you can create topic islands where your model is basically tied or has a guardrail, and it's producing result within that domain. It doesn't like go around and like produce something which is called hallucination or something which is not tied to your topic. And then third is semantic chunking, which is like meaningful unit or chunks that are not just keyword based, they are beyond the syntactic relation. So it's basically able to chunk down the data, and all these can be done like with using RAG. And then lastly, this leads to the resolution where we have context management, where iterating the important context with the prompt and continually like maintaining the relevance. Prompt engineering is essential because you have to give your prompt very well, break down all the complex question into simpler parts by adding or clarifying the prompt. Third is model parameters. I'm sure people would have heard about temperature, which is used for controlling the variations in the answers, and top key sampling. It can help to balance the creativity but also provide relevant answer. And feedback loop. So you have to use user feedback loop to make sure that question answer pairs are basically getting the right kind of answers over the period of time. And yeah, these are the resources I have used. But yeah, please feel free to explore these resources, and this will essentially help you to understand things better. And if you plan to create your own model, I can also show you some example on my screen. Is my prompt flow screen visible to everyone?
We're seeing the slides.
Okay, one moment. I think I'll have to reshare my screen again.
Right. Yeah, we can see now.
Yeah, so this is the Azure AI Machine Learning Studio, if you can see on my screen. And here you will find the prompt flow. This is like a new edition that has been made, I think it started last year. So I've tried a few of them, like you can see on my screen. So if you click on the create button on the left part of the screen, you will see a lot of new flows are present. There's like a standard flow, chart flow, evaluation flow. Some of these are pre-built, some of these obviously you can change over time. There is a Q&A flow and web classification. So because I work in data science, I've primarily used classification accuracy, Q&A relevance, Q&A groundedness. But yeah, obviously you can try all these flows. So one of the Q&A relevance code that I have tried is this one. Can show you on the screen. It will take a while to load, so you'll have to be patient. Right. So on the screen, you can see we have LLMs, prompt, and Python. So you can obviously create more blocks of it, or you can keep one block of it. I've given like a sample question, context, and answer. So for my use case, I have curated answers and I want to compare them with LLM and I want to see that if this answer actually matches with the question that I'm asking. And there's a context that I have provided. But if I change this, it will obviously change the outcome. So this is how you give the input. You can also run a batch of 1,000 combinations or 1,000 pairs. You have to provide this context, question, and answer. There's a output metric generation. You have to write a script for relevance score. I mean, I'm using relevance score, but you can also create other kind of flows. For that, I've taken the connection of GPT 3.5, but I would suggest you take a 4.0, which is the latest model, and it's more upgraded and better. Also, is more efficient. And then here in this prompt section, I've given a prompt to the system, and I'm telling the prompt that okay, this is an AI assistant, and then you are performing an evaluation metric, and then I'm giving a classification of how I really want to see the outcome. And for this rating, I provided again a set of question answer pair, and I've told them that essentially this would be 1, 2, 3 to 5. So the LLM essentially understands what is the way I'm classifying the answers. And this is a part of the prompt that you will have to give if you're using, let's say, the relevance scoring. But if you're creating for grounding or classification, the flow will be quite different. The second part is obviously the concat scores in the Python script that you will have to write to ensure that you're getting the value out for the relevant scoring. This essentially uses a couple of bits of NLP and also ensures that you're getting the scoring for all these combination pairings. And you can obviously aggregate this all result in the second part of the block. Some of this is useful in terms of if you are evaluating for a response, but if you're evaluating for other purposes, the script will have to change based on your needs and like the use case that you're applying it for. The graph on the right shows you the visual structure of how the flow is. The more nodes you add, there will be more nodes available on the screen to view. So, for example, I currently have main two nodes, which is on the relevance and concat, and then there is one node of Python for aggregating those results, and this ultimately leads to the output. To view the output, you will have to click on this option, view outputs here, which will generate an output like this. So we'll have whatever question you provided, the context, the answer, and it will show you a status value. Sometimes the flow doesn't work if essentially you're not given the right sort of input, or like your structuring is not right. So please ensure that the inputs are right and they're structured properly and your prompt is actually structured very properly. So it shows GPT relevance 5, but if you change the input, the relevance value keeps on changing. You can also use logs to see in detail the metric section, which shows you metrics, and you can also trace it based on your requirements and need. And it always shows the status is completed here once you have completed the entire flow. And this essentially helps you to evaluate the entire process. But if you go back and check here on the screen, there are multiple other applications that can be built using this. It's a very, very useful tool. You're still using the connection from like OpenAI, but you're actually using a proper tooling to implement your application. And this can also be used to build rags if someone wants to build a rag. Um, and one second, let me load the screen again. It takes a little bit of while. Yeah, so if you want to create more flows, you can obviously try these ones. Groundedness is primarily used for making sure that your answer is variable and retrievable. Accuracy is used for if you want to classify your data and want to check if it's more accurate or not. Some of these flows are actually useful, but like if you're aiming to create your own application or you want to chat with like Wikipedia, please try these flows. And so yeah, this is a very powerful tool to use. I would suggest everyone to try it. And like if you're planning to upskill yourself and like explore a career which also includes generative AI apart from all the development technologies. Yeah, and that's me. I would open the floor for any questions on this topic.
Shubhangi, this is Liz. I have a question for you, if I may.
Yeah, sure, sure.
You can hear me. Okay, good. Listen, I'm not a data scientist. I'm a UX engineer
Yeah,
and I'm building an app. So I found your talk, first of all, fascinating. And I want to go back through some of your resources with more time and possibly talk to you if you're available. Basically, my question is this.
yeah,
I'm building mobile apps for education.
yeah.
I have one called Quiz Genie, and I have the prompt in front of me, actually. I'm tweaking the app later after this. We have a prompt that generates quizzes, short quizzes, for
Hmm.
now on the topic of front end engineering with React and React Native.
Okay.
So I've got a good prompt that's producing multiple choice questions with
Yeah.
answers and the
Hmm.
correct answer behind the scenes. And at the end, we evaluate, or the quiz tells you if you passed or not based on your percentage score, whether you
Hmm.
got, 70% or not.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I provide the correct answers and then the source material. Here's my problem. The sources are often 404 pages or outdated. Please go to this instead. Without doing full on RAG, how can I encourage my model to source the questions it's building from the latest documentation?
Okay, I think what you can do is like so I think we are building something similar. So it's not obviously on education, but it's like on other topics. So what we are using is we generally try to summarize the data. So maybe like an add a layer in between, like from your original rag to like a second layer where it essentially only extracts the latest part of your source data so that it can create question on that rather than actually accessing the entire data source. And this can actually help you to like only source the latest part of like information for creating your multiple choice questions. I hope. Yeah,
Is
that
it
probably.
Is it at all possible to have this work better with the general public available GPT-4, for example, without doing, custom training? Is there a way, is there a trick I'm missing with prompting or otherwise providing context in order to get away from this training that's like from 21, the documentation in one case just moved and it loves to pull React questions from that old data source, that old
Yeah.
link, rather than the new link.
Yeah, I think no, I think like the best way, like if you want to like still access the public source, I mean, it's like it will be quite like challenging because you will have to sort of write a prompt slightly differently so that it accesses the latest data. But I think if you add an intermediate layer where essentially you are only accessing the latest part of your information and not the entire source, so that way you can ensure that it's actually hitting the like basically the latest part of your public source or data wherever you are accessing it from. But otherwise, like you will have to then find a way to retweak or redesign your prompt slightly because there's like the prompt is essentially the doorway into like how you're gonna get your outcome. And the second way is like narrowing down your data set because for example in my current example I use 3.5, but like if I use 4 or 4.0, I'm pretty sure the answers are gonna be different because I tried them last month with couple other combinations. So I would suggest you either you slightly change your prompt and like try it again, like maybe add like a little bit more conditions using if statements or something. Or secondary approach would be like to add an intermediate layer where you are essentially, your rag is there, but you are actually also trying to ensure you're accessing the latest part of the information and not, it's not basically picking the old part of your source, whatever that is
Yes.
like. Yeah.
That's a really good tip. I like that very much. And I don't mean to hog the question time here. If somebody else raises their hand, I'm happy to yield. But I wanted to know, since we're a GDG event, so you're talking about, a different layer in there. And I love the introduction of topic islands. I'd like to learn more about that. But I'm wondering, since we're using GPT and we're talking about GPT, but yet we're at a GDG event, is there a Google tool somehow? I mean, my entire application is based on Firebase, and I have another application based on Google Cloud with the language understanding and natural language, text to speech, speech to text, translation. So it's called LingoWise. But I'm sticking with Quiz Genie here, and I'm wondering if there is a Google product that will help with this last layer that you mentioned about coercing the data sources, asking it to use the latest info.
Yeah, that would depend on like what kind of model you want to use. So I mean, I will explain you why like I ended up using prompt flow and not like other tools. It's like, because data governance has to be really in place if we want to use like OpenAI or ChatGPT, let's say any other tooling, right? So it basically helps you to maintain that layer of data governance as well. Like you can essentially maintain that. It's like if you want to use it like with other tools in market, there is Bard, there's Gemini, and there's like
Yeah,
Perplexity, and there are a couple more. Actually, a lot of them are there.
Claude.
Like Claude is there, yeah. Claude is really good for like data scientists, but it's not creative. So I would say like one needs to identify what the tooling is for and what the use case is. Like if you're looking for something which is very much just like people want to use it for different purposes, but like if you want to use it for wider scope, a wider picture, ChatGPT is beneficial because it's trained better. It has a wider scope compared to others. But if you're looking for primarily like, oh, I want to begin application and I'm focused on just like code based things, then go for Claude probably. Or like, I would say it's important to understand what the use case we are trying to solve for. So, for
Yeah.
example, for my use case, it's important that LLMs have a good understanding of context and they're creative slightly. And because the application that I'm building is, let's say, voice speech to text transformation. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so I want it to be slightly creative, but I don't want it to like completely go off track, because I don't know, like somebody might be like, somebody very old might be using it, somebody very young could be using it. So we also want to make sure the information is authentic, it's reliable, it could be trustworthy. And so all these things, small components like governance, the part where you are putting the prompt and where you have those guardrails, they all are in place so that the information that is generated is authentic and it's reliable, and we're basically communicating the right sort of message. That's the reason. And I feel like all the others I've tried, they have good use cases, but I feel like in terms of slightly being more reliable, I find OpenAI useful because it provides a support to put those guardrails, and it's trained on a wider set of data. And then like it could be used in conjunction, let's say with prompt flow. But I'm like, I have not heard of any other tool so far which is like as comparable. But yeah, there could be technologies in market, which could actually, be used as well in conjunction with other, tech stacks as well. Yeah.
I could speak to you all day. Thank you so much for that very thorough answer. I would love to contact you again if we could figure out a way to do that
Sure.
and continue this great conversation.
Thank you.